Hello again, and welcome back to the Power Podcast with me, Joe.
And also me, Alex.
Finally me, Sam.
There we go. That was somewhat better than the last time, although I messed up on the last recording, so we have to do this again. As you might notice,
You don't have to tell them that.
we're doing two. I am overtly honest. We're doing this one the second
We
time.
are becoming. We are.
Brilliant. The intro is
They're
already
even worse.
messed up.
Just
Wonderful.
already we're going robot-y as well, because I was just like, half of you came out as, so hopefully that came out okay.
Yeah, it did actually. I can hear you just fine, and obviously it's recording from my end, so that's all good. So this week we're going to talk about. Well, I say this episode because we're doing two in 1 week. Don't get used to it. We're actually doing gravity manipulation, and why, you may be asking? Well, if any of you guys remember anything back from the dev play session that we did in the villain campaign, and if those of you who don't know this, we stream every fortnight a game, us doing the tabletop RPG Animite Tales, as Alex and Sam, along with a few others, are playtesters for this game, and we actually allow you guys to see our playtesting sessions, and we're currently doing a campaign in the world of the modules, but not actually doing one of the modules, because again, we don't want you guys to have spoilers, and they are playing as villains. Now, there's one player who has a character called Talos, and he uses gravity manipulation. And today we were going to talk about that because of what happened. And we'll go through some stuff that actually happened. So we'll actually be able to talk about the power itself. Then we'll talk about exactly how it was used in game, and then how it sort of roughly works mechanically. So the first thing is gravity manipulation. If those of you who are wondering, like, isn't that roughly the same as telekinesis? There's two distinct different features towards it. Gravity manipulation usually has some level of increase or decrease in the amount of control that a user has on an object or an area based on it. For instance, like telekinesis, they could maybe perhaps like have the same sort of forces of like grabbing something and lifting it, or forcing it down and breaking it, holding people, so on and so forth. Gravity is like relatively very similar, but in a lot of situations, people consider telekinesis and gravity manipulation to be still different due to some of the different abilities that the telekinesis and the gravity manipulations allows them to do. For instance, literally controlling the forces of gravity, zero gravity, heavier gravity, or even actually manipulation of that force in on itself. Even just defying gravity, like flight, is a form of gravity manipulation, albeit only on yourself. But it really depends, because obviously if you have wings, then most of the time it's just because that you can flap them rather than you actually have the ability to generate a negative gravity field.
Well, yeah, it's like you're literally just lifting yourself, like you're using something to like balance yourself, whereas this is just you're using your powers to balance yourself, like the actual thing. That's the main difference for me. It's like basically just sort of manipulating the laws of physics, essentially.
Yeah. I was actually going to say to you guys, like, what are your opinions on gravity manipulation as a power?
Well, holy moly, in that dev place, yeah, go back and if anyone hasn't seen it, go back and see it, because like I was taken aback by just how powerful it was. In fairness, like I mean, Talos as a character, the character who's going through who has gravity manipulation, he's gone from like being having not his powers not activate and being sort of a minor character into being the most devastatingly OP out of all of us, I think. And that includes like an actual character that is part of a race of characters that is by very nature more OP than the other superpowers. Simply because like, well, he managed to crush a dude by manipulating gravity, like basically like turning him into a human tin can, and that was just insta kill, pretty much. And he created a giant tornado of antimatter, I guess, just like just whirling everything up and killing like oh, like, I don't know how many people he killed, but he killed 2 heroes, definitely. And we saw the damage, it was, like, something like nearly 200. I think over 200, actually, the amount of damage that he did in one single attack.
It was 188 points of damage,
Oh.
which
Oh.
was terrifying because it was just enormous area. So
Can we just stop to say how much of a character moment that was? Because like when Bill, who plays Talos, said, "I'm hoping that they come," like when all of the other heroes and things coming, we thought he was just insane and overcocky. But then he unleashed that attack, and it's like, oh, that's why. Like, and then he doesn't have to worry about anything at that point once that thing is unleashed. And I think it was it was a strenuous form or something, wasn't it? So I don't know if that was a once a day kind of thing, but like, yeah, he activated it, and it's like, yeah, there is no longer that street, and no more enemies. So yeah, we were okay. So
yeah,
it's a conversation ender, that entire power. It's like, yeah, okay, I can do poison, you can generate darkness, you're a bone man. But I can literally just do, an antimatter tornado, that has the power of a universe in it. I can send these people's bodies into orbit around themselves
the problem
and just, like, destroy each other.
The problem with telekinesis is that almost any ability that allows someone to grab hold of something is almost always considered a form of telekinesis. Because obviously you've got just the ability where your mind can grab things without you needing to physically touch it, because that you have the ability to basically telepathically, with your mind, connect to kinetic energy, which is literally the energy that keeps things together and holds things down. But it's also a force. So you're with your mind, you're generating a kinetic force, grabbing hold of objects and lifting them or breaking them or crushing them. Whereas with gravity manipulation, it's pretty much the same, but you're controlling a force that pretty much like binds things together. And as well as that, like, it can completely destroy things. It's like if you had like, say for instance, you had a bubble of telekinetic energy. That's kinetic power, and it would hold things together really well. And then if you let go, they'd all just fall apart. Whereas, like, if you suddenly grabbed something with gravity and you just went, okay, suddenly that no longer has a gravitational field on it whatsoever. Potentially you can actually have it that it has an inverse gravity field, and basically means that every atom just starts separating from each other, meaning that the person just atomizes, which is terrifying. But there's two different ways that I've seen it being used, but the main one is usually the user can create areas where they can make something heavier or make something lighter. They can make something float, or they make something immediately be squashed and crushed by the weight of the gravitational field. And the other form is being able to sort of like shoot out beams, blasts, and literally almost constructs of solid matter of gravity. Kind of almost like pushing and pulling people using gravitational forces, like for instance making themselves or other objects or other beings the epicenter. Or literally just being able to like make an orb of condensed gravity, and once it touches something, it explodes or implodes depending on the situation. There's so many different scary things.
It's like introducing the rules of deep space into our world, and that's terrifying. Like,
yes, yeah.
I mean, Bill essentially created a black hole, multiple times in that session, with a little bit of help from Vale. But yeah, that's the I think that's the name of his attacks. There's white, black, and grey,
Yes.
which are different types of like, spatial things. It's like, no, black holes are terrifying on their own, but they're kind of a distant thing. They're out there, so they can't hurt us. But you're basically bringing the scariness of deep space here, right next to you. The power of like of an anti-sun. And
yes.
yeah, it's like, yeah, that's scarier than telekinesis. I think that's genuinely more terrifying.
It's on a bigger scale as well. Like gravity, like as I said before, you have to do a lot less to get a lot more devastational power from gravity. Like, yes, telekinesis can be insanely powerful. Like, obviously you got your Jean Greys and you got your Chronicles and you got all these different kind of like shows where they show powerful telekinetics. But a lot of the time, gravity manipulation, the user of said gravity powers has to do very little to do something very devastational or very overpowered. Even if it's not necessarily damaging, it's just this thing of like, yeah, I just make gravity 10 times harder, like 10 times heavier on your clothes, and therefore like either you're pinned or your clothes are now completely ripped off of you. Or, oh yeah, I just make gravity half as much, and now you're moon gravity. So now running, if you even let either of your feet leave the ground before the other one is down, then you'll just float off because there's so much less gravitational friction. Or, oh, I'm just going to make it negative gravity, and you'll just continuously float until either you reach a ceiling, you reach the range of my anti-gravity field, or you just continue off into space and eventually suffocate or die or freeze.
You'll be burned up by the atmosphere. Actually, to get real, like, sort of sciencey, that was a thing that somebody tried to, like, break the world record for, like, getting, traveling the greatest distance with just helium balloons. And like he fought everything out because most people die from attempting these things or get seriously injured because it's like actually very dangerous. But he did everything right. You know, he calculated the distance, he calculated, how much it would take to float him. It was say he had like all kinds of armor and stuff. But the thing that killed him was the atmosphere because it was so cold up there. He didn't actually bring, enough thermals. And he just froze to death. He just had hypothermia. And it's the one thing that nobody calculates in these things. So all you need to do to, like, insta-kill someone, you can crush them, like a can, as we've seen. Or you can just get them up in the air so far that they take cryo damage, to a lethal level, and then they just bring them back down again. They thaw out. It's like, it's the perfect crime.
I mean,
no one will know what happened to him.
This is also another thing, just to sort of bring this back as well, in just lore rather than actual mechanics, is a lot of the time most gravity manipulators can also do stuff like summon celestial objects or make large objects suddenly float up within the stratosphere and the atmosphere and stuff like that, and just be like, okay, I'll just condense a larger amount of gravity from this point onwards, and then suddenly something comes down. And it's just, oh, I can't fight against a rock that is coming towards me at faster than, like terminal velocity, because it's coming to me, like on entry velocity, which basically means it's now not only coming towards me at great speeds and basically destroying a large amount of wind pressure around it, it's also on fire. And it's like, what do you do with that?
I mean, yeah, you can't really argue against a meteorite. I think that's like the main big power of gravity manipulators. Like, you're not really fighting them. You're fighting everything that they throw at you, and that's a lot. As we can see, they can throw giant. They can literally. Actually, yeah, we have actually seen it in the dev plays. Like, Talos lifts a building and drops it on someone, and there's no way they're dodging that. No one's dodging that.
No, you're absolutely right. Like, there are a lot of issues with when you're fighting against gravity users, and this actually does show one specific thing. If you have a weakness to being hit, or if you don't, and you don't necessarily have any damage resistance to speak of, or even if you do have damage resistance but you don't have an immunity to be physically hurt, the issue comes from, well, I'll just distort and bend and meld your body, and because of this, the manipulation of gravity, technically you can manipulate and bend someone's gravity to the point of, like, even if they are like, oh, my body is as durable as steel, it's that thing of you're being warped so much that it's hurting because your body is being bent around space. Even if gravity is returned to normal and for some weird reason space is distorted back and somehow you're still your body is like put back to the way that it was and it's undamaged, the damage is already done in the terms of physical, like internally, like, oh yeah, it's, you know, you're back to the way that it was, but it's the same equivalent of like if someone hits you multiple times, it's like, oh, there's not any bruising, there's not any redding or anything like that, but it still freaking hurts. It's still that thing of like your body is actually taking on damage, it just doesn't show it visually either right now or at all. And, like, obviously gravity, more than likely, is usually something that just tears people apart, but it can also be used to, like, damage people more internally as well, because you're being shaken around, and all these forces are hitting you, but sometimes they're not strong enough to actually tear open skin, but they're strong enough to, like, break bones and, burst blood vessels and stuff like that, and it's really dangerous. But even more so, if you get hit by enough Gs, you fall unconscious, or, like, you straight up, like, lose a lot of your senses. Like, you can become blind if you get hit by too many Gs at once.
Yeah, that's actually, yeah, isn't that something that happens when people go into space with, like, a zero gravity atmosphere? Like, they get all, like, messed up in the organs?
Like,
Or is
there's
that just, like, my
there's a certain
brain?
level of training that they have to take, but yeah, like, zero gravity as well does have certain effects on them. I don't know the entire science, but yes, if you can subject someone to that kind of thing, you can do that. But also, gravity sort of like messes with time as well, because a heavy enough object can actually slow the passage of time down, and and the manipulation of gravity, with a strong enough gravitational field, or with a long enough distance, light can be stopped. Like, light can literally stop in one place with enough concentration of gravity manipulation. And that's something that we usually consider as, like, intangible to normal means. But obviously it is still like photons, and therefore gravity is the most powerful force there is. Similar to like how in Star Wars they're like shooting lasers or shooting beams, and then, you know, a force user will just suddenly stop it in midair, and that's insane, that's crazy. But because that, like, the force is basically not only life force, but it's the force. Gravity is technically the force, so technically they are within some confines telekinetic users as well as gravity users. And that's why it's, I guess, technically one of the most accurate things that they ever show. You know, in the terms of like how exactly gravity and forces can affect abilities and objects and power and matter. It's kind of terrifying to think about it because of how dangerously powerful any gravity manipulator would actually and could actually be, because it's literally messing with one of the, if not the most fundamental part of physics. It's the same thing of like with biology manipulators. That's why they're so scary, because it's like one of the three fundamental forms of science. And if someone can mess with your biology, that is technically pretty much mostly you. Same with biochemistry or just chemistry. Like if someone can manipulate, like, oh, I'll just take these two hydrogen particles and put them with oxygen, and then oh, when I put enough oxygen together and I can then make water, or oh, I put, say for instance enough hydrogen particles all together to create this gas, I can then make an incredibly flammable gas, and it's all these different things, and it is just terrifying, like with the dangerous power. I don't know if I said that right actually. Sorry, not two hydrogen particles, two oxygen particles and a hydrogen particle. Or is it? No, it's H2. Yeah, it's two hydrogen, one oxygen.
Water.
Yeah, it's H2O, yeah. But, like, I'm just thinking, like, does that mean that Talos could potentially have a healing ability if he, like, uses gravity powers and, like, to deconstruct people and then reconstruct people?
Well, he can't, only because that, like, his powers are only purely gravity, but also just based on what we all sort of know and understand of different abilities, like, just like, say for instance, like, you tear someone apart, just because you can put them back together doesn't necessarily mean that, like, they're okay.
Yeah.
Like I've not only seen this in like something like JoJo's, where like the guy can like bring someone and put them back into their original form, but it's like, oh, they're dead, you can't put a soul back in their body. No stand has the ability to bring someone back to life. But it's the same thing with like a couple of other powers where it's like, but I fixed them, they should be okay. And it's like, yeah, but like they're either dead or they're like their body has gone into so much shock that like when they come back to life, they will be in so much frantic pain because everything just happened to them all at once and you just put them back together.
Yeah.
So yeah, like it's that sort of like yes but no.
Yeah, because like I remember that Alfie made an NPC character that had a spatial ability that was like that, where he didn't do it on like a full torso, he just did it like on arms and legs and stuff, where he would like spatially deconstruct and then reconstruct it perfectly. And that was fun,
Oh
but
no, that was
obviously
structure. That wasn't spatial.
Oh, that was structure. Oh, right. Sorry, my bad.
That's alright. But
So, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I mean, yeah. I mean, so let's be honest. There's so many different forms of, like, fiction where someone could possibly do that, and it's like, oh well, in this universe, this guy with this gravity power can put people back together because they like create the structural bonds between pieces of matter and atoms, and because of that, and because you're put back together, you're fine. You don't, you're not dead. Stuff like that. There is possibly some fiction that would actually have that, where it's like, oh, it's practically like magic or gravity magic or something like that. But yeah, it really depends. There are a lot of possibilities for it. And yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There is that possibility of like kind of almost like gravity stitches. Like you just use gravity to just hold them together, or use gravity to just sort of meld the molecular structure together. So it's like that works well enough.
I like that because there's also the stitch in time and stuff, and stitch in space. So you could be like literally the Stitcher, as your there's the superhero person where you just like where you stitch people back together and you stitch matter and reality back together. And maybe it's not entirely perfect because when you have stitches and stuff, it creates scar tissue. So it won't be entirely perfect, but someone who would normally be dead has been put back together again. So that's good.
No, that's absolutely true. Sam, do you have anything to sort of add to this? Like, you've been rather uncharacteristically quiet in this episode.
It's because I have no idea what you're talking about using gravity to stitch people back to life.
I mean, as I said, I don't think so, but there is definitely got to be a piece of fiction around. Like, come on, like in anime, they do stuff like that, where it's like, my power is light magic. Light particles heal you.
I mean, to be honest, closest thing I could think about with gravity would be the ability to make lightning happen, considering it's just different pressures, causing friction in the atmosphere.
I mean,
causing energy to happen.
I definitely
the closest thing I could think would be Talos' is ability to heal himself, considering he's healed by lightning.
I definitely see that. But, yeah. I don't see it enough for it to be allowed in a game like Anime Tales, but I definitely see like with enough physics, you could definitely like manipulate the forces, like the central fusion forces and kinetic energy, to generate friction in the air, and therefore, as you said, with enough pressures, you could technically create electricity, or at least like a bolt of lightning or something. I can definitely see that happening, but as I said, I don't know if I'd allow it.
Or more or less changing, like it's quite useful against people with like super abilities, because all you need to do is change up the G's and their powers become pointless. Because super, if you've got super strength, but under like 10 G's, you have what might appear to be normal strength. Oh, you can move super fast, but, can't lift yourself up. Or you make gravity, instead of it being, you make it like really, 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 really light. Suddenly, super fast, you're just moving in place. Because there's no friction for you to put your feet on.
I think it's just similar to telekinesis in one regard, except from like with telekinesis, there's one problem. Normally, the user actually has to be grabbing hold of something, or actually generating a certain amount of force to actually have like a specific flow of power. Whereas usually, gravity manipulators can actually like generate areas of gravity or actually like as I said again, like less effort. But as you were saying, sort of there, Sam, it's very universal. Like you could fight almost anyone with this power, like a speedster,
Even-
super strength, super dex, super durability, anything. You can eventually find enough gravity or a way to manipulate gravity that would give them either a disadvantage or easily overpower them.
Even people with like powers that have gaseous forms like toxins or heck even fire. Oxygen it has density. If you put pressure, there's reason it doesn't float off into the atmosphere, float off the Earth. If you put enough gravity on it, it will descend to the ground. Will smash hit the ground, more or less. Therefore, making fire unattainable. You probably kill whoever you have under it long before that happens.
I mean, there's no, you're absolutely right. There's also the other thing of like, as I said before, it stops light, so there is a possibility of it stopping any element.
But that's black hole level of gravity. That's infinite gravity, isn't it?
But Talos can do that though.
I mean,
he can already make black holes, and again, we'll come back to him in a second. But I was actually going to say one last thing about this, actually, to do with gravity manipulation as a whole, as its normal factor, without talking too much about Animite Testicles. We'll get into that in a second. Which is, yes, you can make things heavy, and therefore they don't work, or like they won't be able to lift themselves, and it's pretty much universal. Like almost any other power won't really be able to fight it. In fact, there is actually like a theory that people with intangibility would also still be affected, because like certain forms of intangibility that we've all seen, like Kitty Pryde, she's only able to make herself intangible to, certain objects, and at some point she's able to become intangible to everything. At one point, she becomes intangible to, like the floor, and she keeps falling. But I swear at one point there is actually an ability where she can become intangible and still sort of move through it, and defying like the pull to gravity. But if you had the ability to manipulate gravity, even an intangibility user might very well just start falling infinitely until eventually they get to the Earth's core or something.
and they did do that in Batman Beyond.
I think that,
The episodes. Yeah, there was the episode with the guy, I think it was called like Snake Peak or something, where the bad guy more or less had like a belt that made him, I think, invisible was the effect they were going for. Also made him intangible, so he could just walk through walls. Like as the episode went on, it turns out it was infecting him. Like it wouldn't stop working. At the very end, he was fully intangible, and the one force that could affect him was gravity. He just kept falling through like the skyscraper down to the bottom, and then into the Earth's core.
Oh, jeez, what a way to go!
What did Bruce was there? He said, "You can't get any more inside than that."
Oh,
Gold.
that's cold, man.
Jeez.
Well, again, that's another
Back when he
thing.
was-
You can't argue with gravity. Like, gravity was his worst enemy.
Like the main thing about it, which is actually kind of the scariest thing, is that like as we said, like with the whole thing of Talos being able to do it, there was one specific thing that I wanted to talk about, which was, yes, you can technically make things that mimic that of black holes, and yes, Sam, like you are right, like technically it's not a real black hole, because if it was, it would just literally destroy every single thing in sight, but it is something that mimics a black hole. It is a miniature like imitation of a black hole.
Gravity well.
And those who can control space and gravity, or space or gravity, have the unique ability of being able to pretty much use like an almost like, with enough power of gravity, they can almost make an infinite pocket of space. Because that if say for instance you've got like this, let's say for instance this 1 meter thick wall of pure densified gravity, like it's just this 1 meter thick wall where if something goes in it, it just gets stuck, like as if it's actually it's touching a solid wall, or it gets stuck in the middle, but it can never reach the end, because eventually the gravity becomes so strong that it's either pushing something or keeping it in place. Because of this, you have the issues of it's similar to like making a force field that constantly pushes stuff back, or making basically a solid amount of air that once you get to a certain point you just cannot pull back or push forward. And because of that, like, you pretty much have this ridiculous level ability. Now obviously gravity can also give you some insane movement powers, but of course, as I said before, if you have like the ability to like push yourself with gravity, pull yourself, whatever, you then have the one issue of if you move at like ridiculous speeds using like, I don't know, like 5Gs, there is a good possibility that you'll kill yourself using your own gravity powers.
Yeah, just snap your neck Gwen Stacy style.
With an open, with a closed head wound.
No.
But yeah, so either way, like, gravity manipulation is hella scary. Next is actually like, yeah, so we'll talk about it in the Animite Tales, and we'll actually go into what happened in that session then. So in Animite Tales, it's the mutation of telekinesis. It literally just alters the way that it works. Now, telekinesis in Animite Tales has a weight limit, or at least an item limit, based on how many items or objects you can lift, and so on and so forth, and it's sometimes hard to keep track of. But then the mutation takes over, and it then says you no longer have a weight limit. And all of your abilities are slightly more difficult to use, but you still have the normal telekinetic abilities that you had, but now you have this other one. And instead of just doing, like, physical damage, where you can, like, grab someone and start constricting and, constrict them and, deal damage to them, you can now do, like, projectile-like attacks, like, like a gravity slash or suddenly, like, an impact blast of gravity, and it counts as either impact or, physical damage or spatial, because, as we said, bending gravity would technically damage even those who are made of, like, steel or iron. It still would break, hurt, or damage someone. Because, again, your gravity is so strong, it bends space and alters the passage of time. As as we've said before, space, time, and, a couple of other powers are some of the most ridiculous. Gravity is definitely one of them. So anyway, yeah, you have this power and you have all of the different abilities, or you only have like all of the buffs. However it really want to level up. That's not important. But then you can do all sorts of different things, like creating a cone, like an area, like a bubble of like condensed gravity, or you can make a bubble of lesser gravity. You can either make it like minus the gravity, meaning that, say for instance, you can make gravity 10 times heavier. You can then make it so that instead it's actually minus 10 times gravity, meaning that it just pushes everyone upwards. And this means that people will all be either stuck to the ceiling in the same way that they were stuck to the ground, or it means that they'll float all the way to the top of the bubble and then stay there. And it really, really obviously depends, because obviously some people can just do zero gravity, and then that just means that everyone will float if they leave the floor, but there's nothing keeping them stuck to it. So there's a couple of different abilities there, and as I said, you can do spatial attacks and stuff like that, and you no longer have a weight limit ability, because you literally control gravity, therefore weight is completely useless, because you either make things heavier or you make things technically infinitely lighter. And there are limits to this. For instance, if you make someone heavier in the game, the mechanics basically work around that, saying if you're heavier than your own carry weight, then you have to roll a specific number that is equal to a specific requirement. If you fail it, you roll disadvantage, or if it's more weight than you can physically carry, you can't roll at all. If you fail it, and if you succeed, it's then disadvantage. So super strength users do still have the advantage to some level of degree. They still have a problem, but they still can break out of this quite easily. On the bright side, though, once a bubble is placed, they cannot move the bubble. The bubble is stuck there. They'd actually have to dissipate the gravity bubble and then create it again. However, they can do a ton of other things. For instance, pulling and pushing, attraction and repelling, which is what they did, which is what we actually saw in the session. Now, before I move on to the actual session, do you guys have any specific things that you want to say about gravity? Any feedback on how I've explained it so far, or anything that you've seen so far?
Only one thing. Damn, Gravity, you scary. And you now may continue.
Okay,
Indeed.
Sam, do you have anything else?
Oh, no. No.
I didn't think you would, but I
No.
thought I'd ask it anyway.
No. Considering we started this off with me trying to figure out anyone I know that has gravity powers, I don't have much.
I mean, yeah, fair enough. So we'll go to the actual session that this actually came from. So Talos had shown many different things. Now, to give some backstory to Talos, because I don't think we actually do in this session, because again we're kind of keeping some level of mystery, but it's not too much of a mystery now that we've actually seen most of the stuff. Talos is actually a brain in some kind of like special skull casing that is then placed inside of the skull of a humanoid body, kind of like a Frankenstein's monster situation. The casing itself is metal, and there's a special type of gel inside, basically keeping the body, giving the body some level of sustenance to keep it alive. The only way, however, to keep it alive properly is either it is placed in a body that basically works in the usual way. You know, it eats, sleeps, consumes, stuff. So that basically the brain case keeps the body alive just so that it can feed on any of the energy that the body produces. However, the body cannot take any damage from bleeding out. And this is because the brain can be in almost any kind of body so long as most of the organs are still working. Even if that basically means that like it is drained dry. However, the brain itself requires to be constantly electrocuted if it's outside of the case. Now, Talos is this brain placed into this body, and again, as I said, it sort of looks a bit Frankensteinish, or Frankenstein's monster-ish, but I'm just, monster-ish, whatever. And because of this, he has, many different issues. For instance, his body is actually weak to fire, and he doesn't take bleed damage because even though that his body can lose blood, it doesn't really do much to him. And he's immune to lightning, and the only reason that he's immune to lightning is because it's the very thing that keeps him alive. But because of this, any body that he's placed in most of the time is already dead. He's just reanimating it. Because he's reanimating the body, via being inside of the skull, the body can't heal naturally on its own. So it doesn't matter how much sleep he gets, how much he eats, how much he drinks. Nothing is going to heal his body because his body doesn't naturally heal. Even if you tried to accelerate his molecular structure, nothing would happen because the power is just basically staving off decay from this already dead body. That's all it's doing. That's all it can do. So because of this, he has a unique feature, and all of these things are to do with his sort of unique attribute / almost racial features. And the brain itself is inside of this thing called a conduit. It's imbued with the blood of his powers. So it's basically a legendary item that has his powers already inside of it, along with the brain actually having powers. This amplifies his gravitational power. Now, because of this, he has a ton of different abilities that he can use, and he's insanely unfairly OP. Well, I wouldn't say unfairly, but he is insanely powerful. He's very OP in certain regards. But he doesn't really know who he is because he only woke up a few months prior to the actual game's beginning, and he's following these guys. He comes into the museum not long after killing a man by crushing him by making his gravity 10 or 15 times heavier, and therefore he just is crushed. He then creates a cone in front of a pocket dimension door of gravity that just sucks everything in, and then he proceeds to create a gravity well similar to that of like a fake black hole. He shows a ton of different ways of how he uses his forces, including creating a skin of condensed gravity and kinetic power, so that basically has a damage resistance. He floats off of the ground, and obviously he can lift objects and manipulate them. But in the most recent session, he showed off at least 3 different new abilities that none of us knew that he had. One was which was creating like the black hole ability known as Black. A force ability, which was it does 1.5 times damage, where he just creates a flash of white light because that basically gravity moves in such a way that it creates a friction where it just suddenly shatters a certain part of the air, making a small flash of light, and creates a force of either pulling or pushing. And it does, as I said, 1.5 times damage. And the final ability, which is both the ability of Black, where it pulls things into its center, and the ability of White, where it's a force that usually opposes a specific action. Because of this, it creates that white flash, but still the distortion of space, therefore creating a swallowing of darkness. Because of this, it's called neutral grey, where anything that is caught inside of it is starting to be ripped apart, as it's both being repelled and forced in. So, let us discuss, I guess. It is pretty powerful.
I must say, it's like it is kind of incredible. Well, like I said, we'd thought that he was done with all that stuff, but then he brings out Grey, and it's like, wow, it's a sobering kind of thing, because like we've underestimated him for most of the thing, partly because of his terrible roles, but also because we just didn't really know, what his powers were capable of. Really, we know that he has the power of gravity, and it's like he can drop a house on someone, but this is something even more powerful than dropping a house on someone, and that's a kind of damage that. Yeah, that's a kind of damage that's incomprehensible to the human mind, I feel. It's like, it's unquantifiable, it's a nightmare. And it's like, if any of us just accidentally stepped into that, gravity, storm, then we would just be insta-killed. It would be just insane. And yeah, it's like, it is kind of like, it's just a huge character moment, because yes, he has kind of like, yes, Sam. Sam has just typed in the chat saying it was 182 points to damage, therefore it is quantified. But you know what I mean, Sam. Smart ass.
Sorry, but it is true.
In terms of like, I'm talking in terms of like, the human mind, though, not like just in game mechanics. It's like, if this was happening like right in front of you, your brain would just sort of break down a bit, because it wouldn't be able to comprehend what's happening. It's like being faced with like it's even worse than it. Well, we're now called the natural disasters thanks to Talos, and it's like, he's created a space natural disaster that's just wiped out entire swathes of an area.
It's also funny. That's like, I was just going to say, it's also funny that you say that it's like, it's actually maddening, that it's like, it's almost not quantifiable. Now, yes, obviously, Sam, you are 100% correct. Damage. The mechanical damage is 188 points of damage, or 182 points of damage. That is pretty damn quantifiable, since we have actually given it, an estimated number. But the one thing that I was actually going to say, which is, technically he does have an ability which is actually based on something that is actually scientifically backed up to some level of a degree, fair enough, albeit mostly in theory, which is the ability called, I think it's called Overwhelm. And the idea is that he basically creates a distortion in gravity, but it's only like a centrifugal force around the opponent. And what happens is it bends light and sound so that the opponent is hearing and seeing everything that's going on around them all at once. They're literally seeing 360-degree vision in a one point of that area radius. They're seeing behind their head, they're seeing their entire body, and they're also seeing everything around them. They're hearing everything around them, even things that they shouldn't be able to be hearing. And because of that, it can overwhelm the senses. This is actually based on the theoretical possibility of, if you were in a black hole, you'd actually see the back of your own head, or something like that. There's a ton of like really weird things where it's like, if you jumped, you would see yourself already jump, or something like that, or something like that. I can't remember what it is, but because of the way that light is bent and around, you can see yourself doing something either after or before you've done it. Either as a delay or as almost like a glimpse into the future, but you can't control it, and therefore because of that you see literally too much, and again, as I said, you are overwhelmed. All parts of your senses are overwhelmed. So yes, it is a very scary ability, and
No, that's even more scary. Why'd you have to say that? That's like, well, this is what going to be my next point, is that we have to, is there a way of stopping Talos? Like, if he just decides to, because he said himself that he's got no moral compass yet. If he just decides to kill us all, he could in an instant. Like, he'd just bring up the black, like the grey, and yeah, that's us done.
I have two things to say about the Grey. The first one is the reason it did so much damage because he was in his strenuous form, which doubles his damage and allows him to roll advantage. And then the other thing about the Grey is it's an ultimate mastery, which means he had to be level 10 to have it, and he can only use it once a day.
Thank God.
And that's a day, not a short rest. So it's like 24 hours has to be up before he can use it again. Which, yeah,
I was hoping that, actually, because I made him throw up afterwards to punish him, and if he used it more than once a day, I would be dead.
I mean, to be fair, like, you did do it like after we had already claimed that it was like 24 hours after, so he had every capability of doing it. But obviously, it's an ability that he doesn't want to pull off every time, because as Ben, aka Blitzcannon, said in the game, he showed his hand, and he's already tipped his hand. Everyone has seen his greatest abilities, and Bill has actually stated this, and I've made it canon to the universe. He, despite the fact that he had all of these different abilities, it was almost like as if he pulled these all out of a hat, because he started realizing, oh, what if I did this? Oh, what if I did that? Okay, what if I combine these? So he's literally only just come up with these as of now. Like, the strenuous form, however, is more like a survival tactic.
Yeah. I mean, I do kind of like that, actually, because he is sort of like, he's almost childlike in his, like, in sociopathy. You know what I mean? He's sort of like going, yeah, well, you know, it'd be really cool. What if I put this and this together, and it's like, you know, a kid with a magnifying glass and an anthill. You know what I mean? It's oh, I could do, this is so, you know, oh, that would be really cool if we could combine these two things. That would be El Shaddai, you know, looks to approval of the group, and everyone is horrified at the death and devastation that you could do. Are you proud?
Did I do good?
Yeah, it's just sort of... I love that, actually. Just it's the little moments that I like in the games, where, like, he's after everything, and Toxie is obviously pissed that all of this has occurred at once, you know, and like everyone knows, you know, that Nimity is broken, and like he just sort of like after float, he just sort of falls down on his bum, like a toddler for, you know, after, you know, because his, you know, telekinetic flight is gone. And he just like, poof. I'd like to imagine he just sort of sits there and goes like, did I do good? You know, with his little face. It's like, you know, looking just like, you know, like a dog that doesn't know it's been naughty. You know, it's like, and makes it even more terrifying as well, because in the hands of a genius, that's devastating. But in the hands of someone who's just making everything up on the fly, it's even more terrifying because you've got the unpredictability.
I think you're absolutely right. If anyone doesn't get the reference, by the way, the black, white, and grey, it's actually something from Jujutsu Kaisen, where the sorcerer known as Satoru Gojo has the ability of basically manipulating a form of cursed energy that transmogrifies or transmutes into gravitational/spatial energy, which allows him to basically create an infinite barrier in front of him, meaning that all things stop. He has the ability of creating repel and attraction, which also allows him to like instantly teleport to any location, because he can basically just move himself from one point of space to another, basically granting him either like super speed or instant, like, you know, instant directional movement. And the other ability, which is basically a bubble of both of those forces, and anything that gets hit by it is just instantly disintegrated, instantly atomized. And each one of them is called reversal red, attraction blue, and neutral purple. And that's exactly where sort of Bill got that idea from. So that's where the inspiration came from. And it does work,
I think
to
you
be
showed a
fair.
gift as well. I think you showed a gif of that as well, which illustrated just the horror of what we saw in game.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we've gone through pretty much everything. I guess, like, obviously, I don't think there's really much to talk about with what do we want with this power. But I'm going to say this. If you only could have one part of the gravitational manipulation, even if it's something you have to make up, it can't be all abilities. Like, if, say for instance, we had to stump you on one part of gravitational manipulation powers, what would it be? For me, I wouldn't mind the idea of repel, but at the same time, I also wouldn't mind the ability of attraction, but it's really quite difficult. Because I like the idea of the ability to just bring something towards me. But I also do like the idea of just, like, instantly, like, repelling something.
Actually, I've got one. I don't know if this is allowed, but there is an ability that's inherent to the gems on Steven Universe, where no matter where they are, they have a sense of their body adjusts to the gravity that
That
is
is
around
cool.
them. Right?
That
is
cool.
very cool, and I want that because first of all, I'd be immune to gravity powers, and it's like I could be like anywhere. And I'll just walk like normal. Like, I won't be crushed by the atmosphere. I won't, float away into space. I'm always sort of just, just in a perfectly at home in the atmosphere. Maybe not like in terms of culture or anything, but yeah, I won't float away into space. I won't get crushed by the gravitational field. That would be the one power that I want, if I could
Okay.
only have one.
No, I think that's cool because that has no combat capabilities or qualities, but it's still arguably one of the best abilities. Because also, by technicality, if you were to put that up and upgrade it to an even more extreme form, you can actually have it that if you're being weighed down by a very heavy force, including like literal weight, where you actually had like a massive amount of weight on you, you can literally go, oh, the effects of gravity don't affect me, and therefore, like, you can make your body weight less, and therefore you can carry this more, or alter the directions of gravity on your body, meaning that, like, the objects that are so heavy aren't as bad. Or actually passing on that field of adaptive gravity to other objects, meaning that you can make them as light as possible, or feeling like as if they're another part of you. That they're so light, regardless of how heavy they're normally supposed to be. That would be kind of cool. That would be kind of interesting. Sam, what about you? Do you have any particular one-note gravity powers?
I'd like to be able to just reduce gravity around me. Therefore, I can just, like, bulk leap everywhere without the massive destruction that follows.
So sort of
just,
like the basic...
Like, if I want to go to work, just hop that direction.
So the ability to make yourself lighter based on the gravitational pull, and then also make yourself heavier when you need to sort of land, but then make yourself lighter so that you don't crash.
No, just light. No, because I'm not talking about zero gravity.
Even better, though. So you wouldn't have things orbit around you, like just sort of like just constantly be in orbit around you and just pick it up or whatever, because they're just constantly in your field.
Just be like, I'm not talking about zero gravity.
No.
Talk about low gravity, like the original Superman version before he got tactile telekinesis that allows him to fly for reasons that I'm not going to explain right now.
Fair enough.
Like where he leaps everywhere, just like because just lower gravity around me, allowing me just to leap and just like moonwalk, like when they do on the moon.
Yeah, no. I know what you mean immediately. Yeah.
Like, there is a gravitational field, and sooner or later, you will fall down. It's just very light. Yeah, you'll land and be like,
I think mine is the most basic thing that I could have asked for versus you guys. Like, the ability to make it so that you're always adapting to whatever weight you're supposed to be versus the amount of weight that is supposed to be placed on you. and the ability to just be like, literally moon hopping, like moon jumping. That's either of those are so cool. And then I'll either repel or push. I have to choose one of them. I can't have both.
Those are the same thing, just being pull.
I mean,
Oh yeah. Sorry. A repel or attract things. Like literally be able to like pull things towards me or push them away. Like, I think.
to be honest, though, like not many. I don't think many people really go into gravity powers very much. It's not one of like the main big powers that like everybody uses or thinks about. So it's like, you just have to like exert your brain power a bit more to think, oh, how would I use this? Possibly it's more difficulty.
The very first episode of I remember my brother showed me this, like the first episode of the cartoon Avengers. They fought a villain who was gravity based. Like that was the one that brought them all together in that cartoon for some reason. Because he was like super powerful.
Because most gravity powers are ridiculously powerful.
I think it was like Gravitron.
Of course. I will actually say this though, gravity powers are really cool. They're really powerful. They're really interesting. There's so many different ways that you can do them, manipulate them, think about them theoretically because of science and physics and stuff like that. I'd have to say, they are almost always used in some manner or form because flight is considerably a form of gravity manipulation, and I'm only saying this because it's technically true. And definitely not because that this might actually prolong when we eventually do flight as a power on the podcast. But we'll find out as soon as it's gone. Well, I guess that's pretty much the episode, to be fair, guys. Unless if anyone else has anything else to say.
No, other than Steven Universe is good. You should watch it, everybody.
I'll make my two references, and then Sam can make his reference, because I can't remember what reference that he just made. But Pain from Naruto, he has gravity-based abilities, and anyone from the Six Paths has the gravity jutsus or whatever. And One Piece, because there's an actual grav fruit power which allows you to generate slashes of gravity, pull things towards you, push things away, stuff like that. Go on, Sam.
Play Mass Effect. They have powers kind of technologically based, but also kind of not, because some races have them immediately inside them. But they can just manipulate. They can manipulate gravity. They have powers that lift people up or pull them towards them in this black hole-like device, or throw them or pull them, and the usual you have from people.
Fair enough.
Also, read The Shadow and watch the movie. That's my second reference.
Well, on that note,
also the darkness. The first game in the darkness gives you a black hole ability.
Yeah,
because you control the dark.
There's quite a lot of different abilities that allow you to do gravity manipulation. But I guess that's the show. So thanks everyone for listening. If you guys like this, definitely subscribe to Animite Tales. We actually do have a Patreon, so check that out, because we're doing we're building and designing a tabletop RPG called Animite Tales, and obviously most of the stuff that we talked about was on there. So if you actually haven't watched the dev plays, check those out as well, because we stream every other Sunday. And you get to actually see the game being built and play-tested, and you also get to see our weird shenanigans. At the moment, we're doing a villain campaign, and 2 characters were lost to us after a great battle. So definitely check that out. I've been Joe. You can check me out on Animite Tales, at Animite Tales. I go by at Animite Tales or on GoJoe. And then we've got Obscuracom, Alex, who you can also follow them on Twitter. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you very much for listening, and we hope to hear from you again soon.
Bye.
See you in the future.
Ciao, ciao. For now.